Well, good morning. And I'd like to thank everyone for braving the elements this morning to get here to hear what we believe to be a very important initiative. All Connecticut residents deserve a government that is transparent and accountable. The sacrifices of taxpayers must always be respected. We are here today because we believe Connecticut can and must do better when it comes to accountability, especially at a time when our state faces some of its largest challenges, as well as Connecticut receiving a historic amount of federal funding intended to provide relief and investment. Connecticut has an obligation to ensure that every taxpayer dollar is spent wisely and fully transparent. There is a better way to an accountable Connecticut. In 2021, the public trust was damaged when allegations surfaced that COVID-19 relief dollars were allegedly stolen and misused in one of Connecticut's most struggling communities. The pandemic created unprecedented challenges, no doubt, for all of our families. It is infuriating, however, that these relief funds meant to help those who were truly in need, the sick, the hungry, and those that were most need during the pandemic, and the fact is these funds were misdirected. In addition to reports of the alleged misuse, members of the public and the legislature have repeatedly raised questions about when, where, and how federal COVID relief dollars have been spent, and if the executive branch decisions are the best represented to fulfill the needs of the public. Why are some communities, most notably in urban areas, still struggling? Have these funds all gone where the need is greatest? Connecticut must do better to inform and include the public on how federal funds are being used, from COVID relief funds to the historic federal investment dollars headed our way, so that government can be held accountable to the people that we serve. We must also learn from the past and better safeguard federal dollars, including and especially settlement funds meant to help fight something as deadly as the opioid epidemic. We all heard about the heartbreaking death that occurred as a result of drugs inside Connecticut schools last week. No parent should ever have to go through that. It is clear that the presence of drugs and opioids in particular are pervasive right now in our state. We must do everything we can to safeguard funds meant to fight addiction and keep our children, our families, and our loved ones safe. To achieve these goals, we are proposing ideas to enhance accountability measures in the following 3 areas. Number 1, COVID relief funding transparency and oversight. Number 2, federal infrastructure funding accountability. And 3, safeguarding opioid settlement funds. In these areas, we need safeguards, openness, and accountability. So at this point, I would like to bring a couple of individuals up that will give you a more personal approach. First, I'd like to start with Bridget Prince and Randy Watson.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Kelly, for this opportunity. I'm Bridget Prince. We're Veterans for Black Lives Matter. With Randy Watson, he is the president. And we have Gwen Samuels here, president of the Connecticut Parents Union, joining here with us. A couple of months ago, when we heard about the missing COVID funds in West Haven, we actually had the opportunity of meeting Senator Kelly because simultaneously he had put in a request for a 169-town and city investigation of the COVID funds, and as he was saying, based on what had transpired in West Haven. Now, our position, definitely speaking from the north end of Hartford, we were able to see a lot of the disparities, including lack of testing sites, lack of PPE, there were food insecurities, and there were a lot of other disparities that were going on. So when I actually saw Senator Kelly make the announcement on the news, we had reached out to Senator Kelly, and this is how we got to this point. A couple of months later, it is really disheartening to know that we have legislators, we have elected officials who were not joining in and supporting the request for a 169-town investigation. That's reasonable. It is not an unreasonable request. Whether you're Republican or Democrat, if there is nothing to hide, everyone should be able to join in on this request. So this is where I'm at. It's just like not understandable. And like I said, I'm a Democrat. I'm a Democrat sitting here with Senator Kelly, and we support it because it's right. It got to get to the point where it's not about Republican or Democrat, it's about doing what's right. So, I mean, I appreciate again Senator Kelly. He told me about the great experience he had at the African American Museum in his hometown of Stratford. We went, it was beautiful. So, I think the timing of this is perfect too, because, we want to be able to say that, justice prevailed. And telling the public what happened to the COVID funds is important. And we're at the point where everybody is affected. I don't care what your zip code is in Connecticut. You have stood in line for a rapid test kit, and that is unacceptable when literally there have been hundreds of billions of dollars that have come into the state of Connecticut to combat exactly what Senator Kelly is talking about and his proposal. So I'm hoping every legislator that hears this joins. It's the right thing to do. In the spirit of Martin Luther King Jr. and all the trailblazing that he did in the state of Connecticut, I hope that every elected official says, look, it's right. Now is the right time to do what's right. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Gwen Samuel, and first and foremost, I am a mom, a grandma, a taxpayer, and a voter. I am also the president and the founder of the Connecticut Parents Union, and we work to protect the educational rights of children. And we can't be just celebrating and quoting Martin Luther King a few days ago, and then not understanding that demanding transparency is the right thing to do by every taxpayer. I have families getting in trouble with the Department of Children and Families, police knocking on their door because we have unstable support systems for our education. You're open today, you're closed tomorrow. Yet we have billions that have been poured in the state of Connecticut. There should be absolutely zero reason why every child within the state of Connecticut, all 500,000, whether you're from the middle class, whether you are the lower end of the spectrum or the higher end of the spectrum, everyone has been impacted by this pandemic. Small businesses have been closed down permanently. And so not to ensure that we are working together across party aisles, I became an unaffiliated because I am just totally shocked by what is happening in the wealthiest state in the nation with some of the brightest minds. And that is why I oppose an extended executive order power, because by giving one person sole decision-making power, I believe that's why we are here. But if we work together, every elected official that we voted into office needs to pull up their sleeves and represent the constituents that they were elected to work for. And so until that is happening, we will continue to have these press conferences at the expense of our seniors in convalescent homes, in nursing schools, child care centers. 40% of child care centers have closed. Who do you think that impacts? Your private sector. because people have to go back to work, but they cannot go back to work if the systems are in place to ensure children are safe. Public safety is a huge issue. Why wouldn't we have before and after school programs that should have streamlined from the summer learning grant? We had $11 million. We gave it to 200 plus grantees. Half of the programs, the majority of them, barely had 5 or 6 kids. How was that even possible when the whole state of Connecticut was shut down? Every public school and private school and any other middle school was shut down. And so you're wondering, we cannot be shocked and then want to blame these children when they used to went from safe havens to on their own winging it, and not in the state with the brightest minds. So I stand with Senator Kelly, and I want to thank him. And I'm going to say it again, because he is one of the few that, despite the politics, said something, at least said something. If your legislators said something, stand by them. Because that is where we are right now, in a state of crisis, but not enough emergency that we need another executive order power, but enough of a crisis that we need to work together across party lines, regardless of zip code, to stabilize our state, stabilize our communities, and most importantly, stabilize the homes and the small businesses and the convalescent homes and the nursing homes and the hospitals and the veterans, all those that are impacted with this poor decision making. And this is poor decision making when you are not transparent. It is poor decision making if you're not letting people know, the very people that put you in office, that pay the tax base to work. We just have to work together. The bottom line, if you don't get people back to work, we won't have a stabilized economy, and then this will perpetuate this cycle that is putting our communities in free for all. So again, thank you to Senator Kelly and all those that worked on this. We got work to done, and that includes the media. Thank you for covering the stories, because if you don't cover the stories, the people will not know, because we're not transparent. So we're going to need you until the state figures out transparency. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gwen. Thank you very much, Bridget and Randy. And while Bridget brought it up, I will just give a shout out to the African American Museum in Stratford. It is a wonderful educational resource. It's the first of such a museum in Connecticut and the first in New England. With that, I'm going to now introduce Craig Miner.
Good morning. First of all, let me say it's a hard act to follow, and I know it's not an act. You can feel the passion standing behind the people that have spoken already. Last year, you may remember, the leadership of the Appropriations Committee moved forward legislation which was not initially thought well of by the administration. We felt that we should have a role in how the ARPA funds are expended in the state of Connecticut. It was probably the first time since COVID hit that people were willing to say to the administration, we think we have a role here. And so we negotiated with the governor's staff, the leadership of the committee, the legislature, and came up with a framework of how some of those dollars would be spent. At that time, we didn't think we'd have a problem, or at least the last thing we thought we'd have a problem with was whether or not the dollars were actually being rolled out. And we have a concern now that that may in fact be the case. It may not have been the intention, certainly. People are working from home. Municipalities have received a tremendous amount of money. And this is not the last pot of funds that are going to come to the state of Connecticut. And so whether you look at the opioid money, whether you look at federal infrastructure money, no matter what it is, like those that have spoken before me, we believe that we should have a more consistent framework of reporting. We should have a more consistent framework of communicating. As a legislator, I will tell you, it doesn't take long for the Northwest Corner to get fired up when they read a story in the news. I think that most people go about spending state and federal dollars the right way. But the last thing we want to do is to find out that we have pots of money going unspent and still have all the problems that were already being discussed here. So we think by a more consistent reporting requirement before the end of the deadline of when these funds should be spent, it's going to help us motivate the administration to reach decisions on how to help people. There's no doubt that we could do a better job. There is even less doubt with what I would call an absent from the public eye legislature that the people in the state of Connecticut are having a hard time following what is and isn't happening up here. So I expect to work with my counterparts on the Appropriations Committee as we have in the past. I have every reason to believe that Senator Austin and Representative Walker and Representative France will all be interested in putting in place some safeguards, even if it requires us to go back to the funds that we've already handed out and said, look, we would like you to tell us where you are today, municipalities. We would like you to tell us where you are today, state agencies, in terms of getting these funds out. And I think if we do that collectively, we'll get the kind of response that we would hope we would have gotten individually. But I can tell you, the stories go on, and you can call my counterparts in the Appropriations Committee. This is not a partisan issue. They're having the same problems we are getting information out of this administration. So thank you. And thank you again for being here.
Thank you, Senator Minor, who is our ranking member of Appropriations. Next, I'd like to call Senator Henry Martin, who is our ranking member on Finance, Revenue, and Bonding.
Thank you, Kevin. You know, Connecticut is expected to receive nearly $5.4 billion in federal infrastructure funds over the next 5 years. We have this unique opportunity to turn a historic federal investment into something truly transformational for jobs and the state's economy. It is imperative that we use these funds to address Connecticut's most pressing infrastructure needs, to appropriately address climate initiatives, and to advance transportation for the future. We believe the legislative branch should have a role in holding the executive branch, the DOT, and ourselves accountable in staying on that task. We must ensure that these funds are invested wisely to achieve our goals for improved infrastructure, cleaner air, and more accessible travel for everyone. Now, the Connecticut Construction Industry Association has raised concerns about how these federal funding will resonate through the whole industry and how companies and workers will be drawn to other states that get a jump start on their infrastructure projects ahead of Connecticut. So it's important, or I should say very important, that we make sure that Connecticut remains competitive with other states by moving projects forward quickly and efficiently. To another matter, Connecticut does not have the best track record when it comes to directing funds to their intended purposes, especially when it comes to investment in transportation, and I think you all know what I'm talking about. So to ensure that we have an open process that respects the taxpayer dollars, we propose establishing required quarterly reporting to the following General Assembly committees: Transportation, Environment, Appropriations, Finance, Revenue, and Bonding, and Government Administration, and Election Committees. Each report will be followed by a quarterly public hearing before the legislative committees. In addition, the DOT will be required to report on several factors, including timelines, budgets, and progress. We also propose requiring the Department of Transportation make available to public in the form of a website the information shared with the legislative bodies or the legislative body, that is, we want them to report to us a detailed budget and the timeline information, in addition to explanations of why a project may be behind scheduled or over budget, and what actions are being taken to address any delays or cost overruns. We need an open process to move forward these goals with efficiency, accountability, and safeguards. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Martin. Next, we have my deputy leader, Senator Paul Formica.
Good morning. As Senator Kelly referenced, the opioid epidemic in our state is one of the deadliest challenges that we face. And recent news again has illustrated the pain and heartache that's associated with that. The recent national settlement with the country's largest pharmaceutical distributors and drug maker provides an opportunity to expand upon Connecticut's bipartisan efforts to tackle this serious opioid crisis. The settlement is estimated to bring over $300 million in Connecticut programs for the next 18 years, over the next 18 years. An investment that has the potential to support a long-term strategy that will make a significant difference and will save lives. We cannot allow these funds to be squandered, as we saw happen with the tobacco settlement funds. Therefore, today we propose establishing protections to ensure these funds are used to combat the opioid epidemic only, to prevent addiction only, and to help people on the long road to recovery only. The Office of the National Drug Control Policy released a model law for state legislatures that include recommendations to ensure opioid litigation settlement funds are directed to addressing addiction and the overdose epidemic in impacted communities and with public accountability. Recommendations range from establishing a separate dedicated fund, measures to ensure funds are used to supplement and not supplant or replace investments already in the fight against opioids, and steps to include public input and transparency in overseeing these funds. We propose that the Connecticut General Assembly examine the recommendations offered by the ONDCP to develop a strong protection plan with safeguards tailored to Connecticut's management of these funds to help fight this epidemic that we face. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Formica. I'd also like just to let you know that we also have in attendance with us our Senator John Kissel, as well as Senator Paul Ciccarella. Following the arrests in West Haven last year, Hearst Connecticut Media editorial board wrote an editorial on the issues that said, and I quote, "Democrats and Republicans need to be on the same team to shield two things that don't have political affiliations: the state's money and its reputation." We share these proposals today because we believe this is the better way for our state to respect taxpayers, to safeguard their hard-earned sacrifice, and to ensure government works for the people we serve. Good ideas attract friends, and we urge lawmakers on both sides of the aisle to unite behind these good government proposals. Questions? certainly what we believe is that, the money coming from Washington was entrusted to the state of Connecticut to help our state, and particularly people in need, through a very challenging pandemic. What we believe needs to happen is oversight, accountability, transparency, sunlight. And it's not only just ARPA funds and CARES Act funds or the federal infrastructure. It would be any funds coming from Washington that are entrusted to our state and our government to do right by our people. And when we don't have that sunlight, there's the potential for abuses like those that allegedly occurred in West Haven. That was a wake-up call. And what we needed was swift and strong action to restore public trust. To date, that has not happened, and it needs to. And that's all we're asking for. We think this is something people demand, and quite frankly, it's really not, as you've heard, it's not a Republican issue, it's not a Democrat issue, it's a good government issue.
Did you present these recommendations to the governor and Democratic leaders in the discussion regarding the next steps in the state response to the pandemic?
This was not that was not the forum for that. There was a different agenda.
When will you? So you didn't raise it? You haven't bounced this
Well,
off Democrats with the office yet?
We've raised these issues. We were here out on the north side of the Capitol. We have been pressing the administration. We have asked our fellow legislative leaders for oversight. We have not gotten support of those ideas yet. We are not going to stop. The taxpayers, the people we serve, deserve this transparency. And we will continue to press this until it occurs. Well, I think first and foremost, what should happen anytime there's a government program, there should be some sort of procedures, protocols, guidelines that are given to all the communities that anytime they request, financial support from the state, that they're going to be required to account. And so what we would be looking for, as we've requested, is an audit, but that the audit not just go to the executive branch. It needs to also come to the legislative branch. We're a separate but equal branch of government, and accordingly, the people's voice, not just the governor's voice, needs to be heard. Well, yes, there should be, first and foremost, as a state, we should have protocols and safeguards in place. We need to see what those are, because how did alleged misuse like West Haven occur in the first place if these protocols are in place? That's the first question that needs to be answered. Then we need to see, are these proper safeguards? So we need to look at what's there, but also these funds that have been distributed, if there are lax protocols, well, let's see what they were used for. I think even when you start to drill down on West Haven, you had money going to marching bands and other places that may not, or may be a tough stretch to be something that's related to the challenges of COVID and the people in need that are looking for something like food and shelter and health insurance. Basic needs should come first. And we're not going to know that unless we get full transparency of how these funds are spent. No. Well, we're looking to see the results of that, okay? But I don't want to see the results of that through the prism of the executive branch. We would like to see that data and also have not only that data, but the administration come before the legislature to answer questions that we have, and I think are common sense questions so that the people's branch, the legislative branch, has the opportunity to hold these funds, make sure they're transparent, and that there's accountability. We haven't put together a bill yet, but I certainly would not rule that out.
You said you wanted a quarterly schedule. Are you saying now that there's no schedule? Or what have you, are you saying you received no reports as far as what you're asking for? You're asking for quarterly reports to 5 different legislative committees. I can understand that. But my question is, are you saying that now there's no schedule and you don't receive anything on any regular basis at all?
Yeah, right now we're not seeing anything on these audits. And I think we have a right as the legislature to know what's going on.
I just want to be clear, you're talking about proposing legislation,
Yeah, right now there's no legislation on point. We have asked, okay, we've asked the executive, we've asked legislative leaders to bring transparency to this issue, to make disclosure, and yes, okay, we have, got the governor to move along and go from no audit to at least an audit, but that audit is going to be sent back to the executive.
I just want to say that you're going to propose legislation to require this to be done.
Right, the quarterly reporting.
Rely on him or the executive branch to issue a directive that this happens.
Correct. Correct, yes. Yes, the answer over here was more whether we were going to try to codify the procedures and protocols and the whole thing, but yes, as to the... Correct, we will have one, though, by the beginning of session.
I was just going to clarify, so the home resident audit is looking at the money that went to the city's account. Are you asking for a separate audit of money that is coming to the state?
We want transparency on all money coming into the state. Okay, obviously, looking back at the funds that, for instance, in West Haven, there was alleged abuse, okay, which brings questions. And the fact that we haven't gotten transparency to date raises more questions. But certainly with the infrastructure funds, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. It's historic. And it's historic on a whole number of levels. First and foremost, you heard Senator Martin talking about the building trades. Connecticut's labor is some of the best in the country. But we've got to make sure that that labor remains here, because while we're getting these funds, so are 49 other states. And they're all going to compete for that labor. We want to keep not only the good labor and skilled families right here in Connecticut, but we'd rather bring more families to Connecticut and put this money to use to rebuild our economy and our transportation system, but also to make sure that that is done in a manner that is smart and is sensitive to things such as reducing greenhouse emission. The only way we're going to make sure that this investment works for the people of Connecticut is to make sure the people of Connecticut are at the table. And that, I believe, is done by getting the legislature involved.
We asked you to respond to, as the ranking member of the Aging Committee, to the governor's latest executive order requiring nursing home visitors to provide full vaccination and, if eligible, also booster dose or otherwise produce negative test results or test negative on the spot.
First, I think that's an admission that my statement back on January 6th, when the governor first said that COVID positive individuals could be discharged to nursing homes, that's an admission that allowing somebody infected with a COVID virus is potentially dangerous to a vulnerable population. And as I said then, I will say now, we need to always exercise an abundance of caution, armed with the knowledge of what happened, how COVID, it was a scourge in our nursing home industry. and also the Mathematica report, which quite frankly was $1 million indictment on what happened, and the recommendations from that report demands that we exercise an abundance of caution. But what I also found interesting here was all I hear when they talk about extending the executive orders is that the executive is the branch that acts quickly, swiftly, nimbly at dealing with these issues. The fact that it took 2 weeks to get to that conclusion demonstrates that the executive is not always the person who acts quickly and nimbly. Anybody in this building that sees what happens here the last 2 weeks of session knows that we can move a lot of initiatives in a short period of time. And that is actually another admission as to why the legislature needs to be involved in the process. No. No, I don't take issue with it because I believe this is a vulnerable population that has paid the highest price for COVID. And what they needed, and they need all along, is our diligence to make sure that they are protected.
And what about this question of the governor extending his governor's emergency powers? He's supposed to present you guys a list of executive orders, which I think you all know. And just wondering where things stood after your discussion yesterday. Stand.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, Paul. We're, look, they're sharing information, and we will look at that information and what is going to move forward from that. What I can say is that this, I think, would be the 7th, it's the 6th or 7th extension of executive power, and our caucus has been against that since, I think, the 2nd extension. So I think we remain committed in that position, but we will look at whatever information is shared with our caucus. Thank you.